And we're live. Thanks for doing this, Jason. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Yeg Show with T. Adeyemo. I have Jason Schilling is the president of the Association of Alberta's Teachers Association, Alberta Teachers Association, ATA, and he joins us to take questions about reentry and the progress so far. Thanks again, Jason, for coming on the Yeg Show.
Well, thanks for having me on, T. I appreciate you giving me some time.
I know time is of the essence. I'm just going to get us right into it. Now, can you describe the support that is in place generally for substitute teachers, visible minority teachers, and teachers with pre-existing condition in this pandemic?
Yeah, well, I'll just start backwards on that list. So we know that there are a lot of teachers out there who might have pre-existing conditions or have some immune immune compromises that they need to be mindful of entering schools. So we encourage those teachers to go to their family doctors to get a note to talk about the risks of going back to school, and if they were of great risk, then they should be working remotely. And I know that a lot of school boards have made accommodations for teachers that way. So teachers with underlying health issues can work remotely with students who've also opted to work remotely as well. And that's been a bit of a hard mix right now to try to sort all of that out. I know that it's been a bit complicated, but they're working those details out right now. I know that there's some teachers who don't have classes yet or students who don't have teachers yet, but we're still early in the new year to work that out. Substitute teachers, we've been doing a lot of advocacy work with government and school boards to make sure that they have income security and benefit security, especially if a substitute teacher should test positive for COVID or be in close contact with somebody who is COVID positive, and then they need to take time off and self-isolate because then they're without income for a certain amount of time. And I know that some school boards are putting contract or subs on contracts to have them work specifically at a couple of sites, and then they use them that way. And so it's just a matter of getting school boards to do that work to make sure that we are securing the substitutes that we're going to need for schools. And I think there was a third part of your question there. I might have forgotten.
Yes, I was thinking about support for visible minority teachers. What sort of support is in place for them during this pandemic?
Well, every teacher who is working in schools right now would have access to their collective agreement. So all of those supports within the collective agreement, such as sick leave benefits, and all of those things would be available to all teachers.
Awesome. When you speak to teachers right now, are they telling you they feel safe? What are you hearing from the teachers right now?
That's a great question, T. I hear from teachers, they are feeling anxious and concerned. We just did a survey of our membership last week after the first week of being back into school, and 90% of them had indicated that they were feeling anxious and exhausted already from just trying to get the protocols ready for school coming back. So we know that there's a lot of concerns that teachers have, but also through the pandemic, we did another survey, and one of the things that teachers indicated is that they miss school, they miss their students, they miss being in their classrooms because that's why they went to school. They want to be teachers, they love their jobs. They want to be back at school, but they want it to be safe, and safe not only for them as teachers, but for their students, the rest of their colleagues in the building, and their families when they go home at the end of the night. They want to make sure that everything is in place, and that's why we've been working to try to get government to improve and enhance the scenario plans as they go back.
I know for many teachers, this season is filled with anxiety, and you advocated that the $250 million in federal funding be focused on significant staffing needs, reduction of class sizes, sanitization, etc. Is this what your members are telling you that is already happening in schools? Are schools already using this money to improve, to reduce class sizes, perhaps, and make? Are they making health a priority, public health a priority in schools?
Yeah, so we've been fortunate to be working with an epidemiologist from the University of Alberta through the summer to make sure that our key 7 priorities for a safe return to school were based in science. And the science is telling us that social distancing is a really big factor in mitigating the risk of COVID-19. We know that from our own polling that there are about 27% of teachers have classes with 30 or more kids in it, and we need to address that. We need to split those classes to reduce the numbers in there so that we can have greater social distancing in class. So just imagine a regular classroom with maybe 7 kids taken out of it. That's a whole row of desks. If you could take a whole row or a row and a half of desks out of a classroom, that makes a huge difference in order of having that physical distancing. And school boards were afforded this money by the provincial government that came through the federal government to address staffing. And so we are advocating and pushing school boards to make sure that they address staffing for teachers, but also educational assistants to support students who are in school and remotely. And also custodians, because teachers have also indicated that the cleanliness of the school is really important. I come from a small school down in the south around the Lethbridge area, and we didn't always have a custodian through the course of the day. And there's lots of schools that are like that, where custodians are working split shifts. They're at one school in the morning, they're at another school in the afternoon. We need people in those buildings cleaning and supporting teachers and students all day long. And so that's where school boards can make a definite start for the health of our students and the safety for everybody.
I'm a bit confused here, Jason. Is that already happening, or we are still in the process of advocating for the school boards to listen to what you're saying?
Yeah, well, the money just came from the federal government about a week and a half ago, when we met last Wednesday, when the government announced that they would give that money to school boards. So where school boards are right now in terms of hiring extra people, I'm not 100% sure. We meet again tomorrow as a stakeholder group, and my plan is to ask them where we are on that. Where are you hiring? Who are you hiring? What are you doing to make the guidelines that we got from the chief medical officer in Alberta Education? That's sort of a baseline to me. That's the floor. That's not the ceiling. So what are you doing to make sure that schools are safer?
Do you feel frustrated maybe that the government is not listening to what you're saying? Because a couple of weeks ago, you had a meeting um, with Miss Lagrange and Adriana Lagrange, Education Secretary Minister, I don't know. And you said you asked if they could delay the start of the school year, and that was declined. And I looked at your policies and your proposals also for the opening. Not everything has been accurate too. Do you sometimes feel frustrated that that this government may not be listening to all that you're saying?
Oh yeah, extremely frustrated at several points through the whole pandemic, when classes were canceled in March, through to talking about reentry plans. The 7 priorities that we listed out for a successful reentry are not unreasonable. They're not unattainable. They're actually quite easy to do. It takes some will and it takes some funding, and we weren't seeing that funding coming from the provincial government. It came from the federal government. And I know that teachers across the province have expressed to me their frustration as well, that they weren't going to be ready, they felt, for kids to come to school. That's why we had asked for a delay. And they'd come back and said, well, we're not going to do a blanket delay. We'll let school boards decide if they want to do that. And some did. Some delayed students. They're actually starting today. Others did a staggered start through the course of last week. Half the students came, a quarter of the students came, just to get a lay of the land and how school will be different, because it's going to just be different this year, no matter what we do. And so it was frustrating to not have teachers' voices heard. And so that's why we still keep advocating. It's why we still keep asking for meetings with the government. That's why we keep talking to school boards about what are you doing, what are you doing, what are you doing. Our local, the ATA is broken up into smaller local associations. So our local presidents are working with their superintendents in their areas, and they're also doing the same advocacy work that we're doing on a provincial scale.
Last week, the Premier said, this Jason Kenney said, COVID-19 infections in schools are inevitable and there's no reason to keep classrooms shut. What do you think about this? Because Sarah Hoffman just had a press conference and she said there are 20 cases already in individual schools, and she was just made aware of 16 since Friday. I mean, let's get your reaction to what the premier himself said. It's inevitable. It's no reason to keep the schools, to keep classrooms shut.
Yeah. Well, I know that we want schools to go back because we know that students benefit from being in school for a variety of reasons. It's where they learn, it's where they socialize, but we also know that we have students who are at risk, and school for them is a safe place. And to be at school where they're safe is really important. But we have to make sure that it's safe, and we know that there will be risks out there when it comes to COVID-19, but we need to be doing everything that we can to mitigate those risks. And I think that that's super important that we do that, and that's why we keep advocating with the government on that. And the epidemiologist that we work with, she really talked a lot about this, and I've heard it today on the news as well, this notion of community spread, that we need to make sure as a community as a whole that all Albertans are doing the things that they need to do, that we've been hearing for months, in order to be safe ourselves so that we don't have community spread. Because once you have that, it works itself into the schools, and then that we see that schools, the science and the research says community spread and how it's going in the community tends to reflect what's happening in schools. And so we need to it's going to take all of us to make sure that we are doing the right things.
Do you see us making it through this school year in Alberta? In Ottawa this morning, 200 staff, students at 5 different schools were told to isolate. Do you think we stand a good chance of seeing the school year through with this model?
Well, I mean, there's 3 models that was released in June, on June 10th by the government. Scenario 1, which is what we're starting school in now, what they call it the near normal. Scenario 2 is sort of a hybrid where you have students working remotely, rotating their time through school. So maybe, like high school students would come twice a week and then work remotely for the remainder of the time. And then scenario 3 was what we had in March, where it was completely remote online learning. We need to be able to segue between the 3, and I think that it's going to be based on what's happening in communities and schools. And I think we need to make sure that we're supporting principals and teachers and the rest of the school staff to be able to make those transitions really quickly, and parents as well. I think there's another issue there, because if we went to remote teaching scenario like we did in March, that's really going to affect a lot of parents and their ability to find childcare and their own employment as well. So there's a lot of factors in there in determining where we end up. It's hard to say right now, but we've got an opportunity to address the needs at schools and to make sure that we're addressing the needs as well for our communities.
Is it a fair assessment to say that over time things will improve across schools in Alberta?
That would be my hope. I would want schools to have improvements. I would like us to see public education in Alberta as an investment. Right now, when I listen to politicians talk, it seems like it's an expense that we can't afford to keep our schools and the people who work in our buildings and the people who attend those schools safe. And that really aggravates me, and it breaks my heart a little bit to see that. We need to look at it as an investment. We're investing in our youth, we're investing in the people who work in those buildings to make sure that they're safe, because child's education is important.
I mean, public education appears to be badly beaten under this government. And this morning, the Choice in Education Act took effect this month, and that came across in the news this morning. Do you see this as eroding public education generally, or not?
We're quite concerned about the Choice in Education Act. For some parts of it, it just sort of instills what we already have. We already have a lot of choice in Alberta. We have public, francophone, Catholic, private, charter, and homeschooling. But some of the parameters that they changed were troublesome around charter schools, because charter schools are not governed by trustees and publicly elected trustees, and we would like to see that that would be the course, because public funds do go to the charter schools. One of the most alarming parts about the Choice in Education Act was with homeschooling. So homeschooling parents can put a plan into the government and not follow Alberta curriculum, and and be subject, I guess, to a standardized test at the end, which we're not super supportive as an association anyways. But to not have that oversight of homeschool students and making sure that they're accountable to somebody is really troublesome, because it erodes public education in the province.
Hmm. Thank you. What are your, let's assume you had a wish list and you had the ears of the Premier tonight. What would be the top two items on your wish list for the Premier?
That is a fantastic question. I don't think anyone has asked me that yet. For right now, being in the situation that we are with the return to school, it would be making sure that our schools are as safe as possible, and to put the funds available for the needs of our buildings. So split classes, reduce class size, it's a huge issue. It was a huge issue before the pandemic. We actually need to do something about it. I think the pandemic has amplified and highlighted a lot of the shortfalls that we have in education. So when classes were canceled, you saw students who didn't have access to technology. So how could they do remote teaching? We have students that there's a lot of inequities in the system with poverty and children who live in abusive situations, and they don't have access to the same supports as everybody else. And we need to level that playing field out for everybody. I also think that we would, aside from the reentry, to make sure that we're supporting public education in this province. The majority of our students and our parents choose public education, and we need to make sure that we're strengthening that and not eroding it through other means of privatization. And it's for the good of our province that we have a really strong education system. And we do in Alberta. We are one of the top performing jurisdictions in the world. So I don't understand why we would want to undermine it.
I was on your website a few moments ago and I noticed you did not have a daily online reporting of COVID-19 cases in schools. And this is something Sarah Hoffman herself called for this morning. What are your thoughts on that? Is this something the government should be making available, or does this fall in your jurisdiction?
Well, I
As
think I think
Mhm.
it's something they should be making available so that the public knows. But it has to be done carefully so that we don't get into a lot of fear. I don't want to say fear mongering; it's not the correct word. I can't think of the word I'd want to use right now. But schools are not to blame, teachers are not to blame, principals are not to blame if COVID cases should come into the building, and doing the best that they can, but we should have a record of it. It's especially important for our substitute teachers who need to know what buildings and what areas are having COVID cases appear, because that would affect their work as well. And it's, as a community, we need to know as well.
Okay, so what is your message to your teachers generally? What would you want them to know so their hearts are encouraged as because they are frontline workers? What would you say to cheer them up this Tuesday afternoon?
Yeah, the part of my work is to advocate and promote public education in the province. And for me, it's really quite easy, because I know that teachers are phenomenal people. They're creative, they're resilient, they're professionals, they work hard, are being asked to work harder with less from the government, and that's shameful to me, and that's why I do the work that I do. And I just, I'm a teacher. I taught for 23 years before I took on the role of president, and I just know what it's like to be in a classroom with those kids and the joy that teaching brings. I miss the classroom every day. I'd be back in my school in a heartbeat and working with my kids, and so I just know that we're doing our very best to make sure that we can have public education as good as it can, as the best as it can be, and to work towards making it as safe as it can be.
Jason, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, T,
Thank
thank you. This was a great conversation, some great questions. I really appreciate it. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.